a tiny little street, standing on the tiny corner with his tiny little feet, and he says, "Hey Lou, ooh." Oh, tiny little man with a tiny little hat, gonna go buy some tiny food for his tiny little cat on his tiny little walk with his tiny little legs, talks with his tiny mouth, gonna blab along for days, and he says, "Hey Lou, ooh." Oh, tiny little man with your tiny little shirt and tiny little pants, walking in tiny little circles in a group of ants. Oh, tiny little man, oh, tiny little man, you've got a tiny little soul and tiny little ears with tiny little holes. Tiny little man sit on tiny little chairs, reading tiny little newspapers that say watch out for the bears. Tiny little man with a tiny little TV, watching tiny little news pictures about a shooting spree. Tiny little man eating tiny little cheese with a drop of honey from tiny little bees, and some tiny little bread from some tiny little wheat knocks him off his high horse and off his tiny little feet. Oh, tiny little man with your tiny little shirt and tiny little pants, walking in tiny little circles in a group of ants. Oh, tiny little man, oh, tiny little man, you've got a tiny little soul and tiny little ears with tiny little holes. Oh, tiny man, look how small you are, driving to your work in a matchbox car. Oh, tiny little man, how did you get so small? With such a giant ego, they really dropped the ball. Tiny little man with tiny little hands, tiny little features, no pituitary gland. Tiny little man singing tiny little songs, smoking little nuggets and ripping tiny bongs. Oh, little man, oh, tiny little man, little man, little man.